Almost overnight, she went from a possible witness to a person of interest in the case of a missing mom of 5 from New Canaan. The girlfriend in the middle of a bitter and brutal divorce battle.
The stuff you were throwing out, we have. And it's all Jennifer. It belongs to Jennifer. Do you understand?
Turned high-profile murder investigation.
Guys, what happened to Jennifer Michelle?
We're taking you inside the trial of Michelle Troconis.
And thanks for joining us once again for Inside the Trial of Michelle Troconis. I'm Shannon Miller. After a couple of days off, testimony resumes today in Stamford. Let's get you up to speed on the past week. After much anticipation, we heard from a key witness for the state, Pavel Gumieni, the former employee of Fotis Dulos' luxury home building company. The Four Group gave a first-hand account of what happened from his perspective the day Jennifer Dulos disappeared and the days that followed. Gumieni has been granted immunity in the case. The jury learned whose DNA was found as well in the evidence dumped along Albany Avenue in Hartford. For the first time, they heard DNA from Michelle Troconis was found on a garbage bag. Her attorney arguing that the amount was extremely small, the equivalent of 3 skin cells. We also learned that a hair matching Pavel Gumieni's mitochondrial DNA profile was found on a sponge, along with Fotis Dulos' fingerprints and DNA found on trash bags and a glove. Now, among the items that were consistent with Jennifer's DNA, a cutting from the seat of the Toyota Tacoma, which had presumptive positive tests indicating the presence of blood. Gumieni testified he had driven Jennifer in his Tacoma once. How we left off on a day of technology forensics. Witnesses from the State Forensic Lab and local police testified about what they learned about 2 key vehicles in the case and from one of Fotis Dulos' cell phones. NBC Connecticut's Kevin Geis is live for us once again outside Stamford Superior Court. Kevin, it is day 21 of the trial. We are 4 weeks into what was estimated to be a 6-week-long trial. Are you learning anything more about the timing of all of this?
Shannon, good morning. The only thing we've learned so far as details about the timing is from the court's perspective, we are roughly on track with where they wanted to be at this point. They're still expecting to wrap up testimony sometime around March 1st. Back during jury selection, Judge Kevin Randolph offered March 1st as the overestimate, meaning the court would have preferred the trial wrap up before that March 1st date, but the jurors were prepared to be available until March 1st. According to some questioning at the end of last week, the state couldn't specifically indicate how much longer they would need roughly on time. And based on the judge's quick math, he estimated we will rub up against that March 1st deadline. Here's what defense attorney John Schoenhorn had to say about where the trial stands at this point.
You make an estimate, but again, I am not in charge of the prosecution's case. I'm not in charge of who they call, how they question, how slow they question, or how much time they spend with each exhibit and each witness. That's something that the prosecution has to decide, but it's not, I'll be quite honest with you, it's not going to abbreviate anything I have to do. The longer the state's case takes, the longer it's going to take for me to start my case. My case is going to take about the same amount of time, regardless of what day I'm starting it.
Schoenhorn did indicate that for his defense, he would need about 4 days in total. But that, of course, was at the end of last week. So it'll depend exactly on what the state has left as far as direct testimony. Shannon.
All right. And Kevin, Schoenhorn had indicated he would need, again, about 4 days total for this cross-examination. So do we now run any risk in getting so close to that state's overestimate of the timeline in all this?
Right. Of course, there's always a little bit of a risk. Now, back during the jury selection process, Judge Kevin Randolph made it quite clear that March 1st was an overestimate. So we wanted to know if any jurors that may be selected had anything lined up in the beginning of March, like doctor's appointments or planned vacations. Of course, that would cause them to have to likely be dismissed from the trial. So there is always that little bit of a risk. The closer you get to March 1st, that a juror has some sort of commitment, and the longer the case goes, there could always be an emergency where a juror has to be dismissed as well. We've already seen that one time. So there's always a chance the closer you get to March, that could happen again.
All right, Kevin, let's get into some of the testimony from the last day court was in session on Thursday. We heard about activity on Fotis Dulos' cell phone. And for the second time so far in this trial, the name Andreas Tsis came up. The first was when Detective Kimball was asked about other potential suspects they considered. Tsis was a longtime friend of Fotis Dulos' from Greece, and investigators believe he called Fotis the morning Jennifer disappeared in order to provide an alibi. According to search warrants we have obtained from the Department of Homeland Security, federal investigators seized Tsis' cell phone when he flew into Newark Liberty International Airport in June of 2019 to visit Dulos. Investigators say Dulos texted Tsis the night before Jennifer's disappearance, instructing him to call him the next morning at 8:30 a.m. They say Tsis made that call, then created a calendar entry on his cell phone which said telephoned Fotis. Now we are learning more about the call from what was found on Fotis' phone.
That name, Andreas Tsis.
What time did that call come in, sir?
That call came in on 5/24/2019 at 8:26 a.m.
Was that answered?
That appears to have been answered, yes. It has a 17-second duration, and as opposed to these missed calls, it actually is called an incoming call because the device recognizes it as answered.
Now, again, that call answered by Michelle Troconis. That's according to statements that she gave to police. Fairfield Police Detective and digital forensics expert Michael Clark also read out loud to the jury the messages Fotis sent Andreas Tsis the night before that call. They say, call me tomorrow morning, 3:30 yours, meaning your time, since Andreas was in Greece. And then on the morning of Jennifer's disappearance, about 2 hours after that prearranged phone call, investigators say Andreas forwarded Fotis a meme that was played in court.
All right, you have two choices. A, you can spend the rest of your life with your wife. Or B.
So if you missed that exchange, here's how federal investigators described that video. A female off camera asks, all right, you have two choices. A, you can live the rest of your life with your wife, or B, at which time the man on camera interrupts and yells B, and then that video ends. According to a residential surveillance video from Wells Lane near Jennifer's home, that message would have been sent around the very same time Jennifer's Chevy Suburban was seen driving away from her home that morning. Investigators believe her body was in the Suburban at that time. Now, back when we obtained that search warrant, NBC Connecticut called Tsis' cell phone. That was me that made that phone call listed on the warrant. The man on the other line at the time told me, no thank you, when I asked for a comment. Now, on the morning and early afternoon of May 24th, Fotis' phone remained at his Jefferson Crossing home in Farmington. Detective Clark performed what's called a device events report, which documents when certain things on a phone activate. Here's what he outlined from that report. The most common instance is the display on or off. It can happen when someone touches the phone and it lights up, or just simply when the phone receives a notification. That does not require somebody to be using the phone. But there were a few of what he called manipulation events. Take a look here. That's when somebody needs to manipulate the phone in order for the action to happen. Here are those instances. The phone was unlocked 5 times before 1 p.m. at 6:44 a.m., 7:01, 8:07, 8:31, and 9:03 a.m. With that iPhone model, it could be a passcode or face unlock. And then there's an orientation change. That's when you flip a phone sideways so the display becomes in a landscape view. Clark's report shows that happened 5 times at 6:45 a.m., 6:46, 7:01, 8:31, and 9:03 a.m. Now, the speaker on the phone also activated at 8:26 a.m. As we said, Troconis admitted she answered that phone call from Tsis. And then at 10:34 a.m., the front camera powered on. And the report shows that was a FaceTime. Clark didn't give any more details about that call. And there was some data on the cell phone related to Apple's health app as well, Kevin. 63 steps taken between 6 and 7 a.m. that phone tracked. Kevin, we know that the phone stayed in Farmington the morning of Jennifer's disappearance. In her second interview, Michelle Troconis first told investigators that she thought Dulos' phone had his cell phone, but later told them that it was possible that he had accidentally left it behind. It was in Troconis' third interview that she told investigators she picked up the call from Fotis' friend Andreas. So, Kevin, my question now is if investigators believe that Fotis Dulos was down in New Canaan and that the phone was left in Farmington, who in the world was using it and manipulating it as that phone's data shows?
Right, so there's two things going on here. So first, investigators and prosecutors are sort of pointing toward the phone remaining in Farmington. So Fotis Dulos did not have that phone, but there were calls and text messages and actions happening on that phone throughout the morning that indicate it was in Farmington, but it was not necessarily being used. So the prosecutors later pointed out that the phone text messages, phone calls weren't responded to until the early afternoon. But there was that one key phone call that was answered that Michelle Troconis, according to the arrest warrant, it was Kent Moaney, a friend of Fotis Dulos, who indicated to her that she should answer that phone call. So there was that singular phone call that was picked up. And of course, prosecutors are using this as a way, again, to tie Michelle Troconis into this larger conspiracy.
All right. And Kevin, we also got a visual representation of Fotis Dulos' comings and goings the afternoon and to the early evening of May 24th, based on his cell phone's GPS records. Clark was asked about this video here that he had mapped out of the areas Dulos' phone pinged. The yellow pins you see indicate a ping. There were quite a few of them at his home at 4 Jefferson Crossing in Farmington and the property for sale at 80 Mountain Spring Road. Now, earlier on Thursday, we heard from a computer forensics expert at the state lab. He told the jury about data collected from 2 vehicles, including Jennifer's 2017 Chevy Suburban. You may remember that it was found abandoned near Waveney Park in New Canaan the night that it was reported missing. Now, Newt testified that he was able to tell that a phone connected to the Suburban at 2:56 p.m. on May 24th, 2019. But he says he wasn't able to tell exactly whose phone it was.
You don't know if this phone belonged to Jennifer Dulos, do you?
I do not.
Do you know if it belonged to any of her children?
I do not.
And do you know if it belonged to Lauren Almeida? Do you even know who that is?
I don't know who that is.
Okay.
Now, Lauren Almeida, the Dulos nanny who testified earlier in the trial, on cross-examination, attorney John Schoenhorn asked the witness about the call history from Jennifer's phone that showed up in his report. And while this phone was just called iPhone, the calls made from the phone could shed light on its owner.
Well, and the next call is, I guess these are in the next call earlier, rather the evening before, May 23rd, was to somebody named Caroline Luft. You see that?
I do.
And then there was, you mentioned the other 2 people, one being Gloria Farber and one being Dwayne Lavold, correct?
Correct.
So if one were to go through the phone records of an individual, determine whether these calls in fact were occurred, one could match up that phone, so-called iPhone, to the particular device if there were phone records to do that, right?
Objection.
So that objection was overruled. The answer to that question was yes. So, Kevin, we know Caroline Luft is Carrie Luft, a close friend of Jennifer Dulos, who has also acted as the spokesperson for her family since 2019. Gloria Farber, Jennifer's mother. We heard about a call to a doctor, and we now know Jennifer, again, had doctor's appointments that morning. Kevin, attorney John Schoenhorn really wants to try to confirm to the jury this was Jennifer's phone that had pinged to her Chevy Suburban that afternoon.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is sort of a big point for the defense. He continues to sort of point out that that sort of erroneous Bluetooth connection was definitely suspect. Of course, he has a lot of questions about who pinged that phone or why was that phone near the Suburban at that point, if Jennifer Dulos was missing at that point. So he has a lot of questions about exactly what that phone pinging Bluetooth connection meant. But of course, state prosecutors not able to sort of elicit a lot of pure exact measures about how this data is coming through and exactly why Bluetooth connection might show in some of this forensics data. So it's kind of more of a question mark. We're expecting to hear more of it from the defense later on in the trial.
Now, according to attorney John Schoenhorn, he has said that he does not believe that Jennifer's phone has been found or recovered. Kevin, Newth also took the jury through the data extraction report on the Ford F-150 Raptor. Pavel Gumiany testified that he had the Raptor when he drove to work that morning from his Simsbury home to Sturbridge Hill in New Canaan to work at that other home there that was a Ford Group property. We see that in the data extracted from the infotainment system. Then there is a chunk of time from 12:30 p.m. to just before 4:30 p.m. with no data. Newt testified the system had damaged sectors. Here's what that means.
Computer hard drives can wear out over time. And computer hard drives are made up of sectors. They have thousands of tiny little sectors like pockets. And the data is broken up and saved a little bit into each sector. And what happens over time is these sectors can wear out or get damaged. And so what all the wear leveling app does is spread out the use of these sectors to try and make them last longer to prolong the life of the device. That's all it does.
One, please.
So damaged sectors basically means less places to save data and a better chance of data being overwritten. And once that happens, it's lost forever. On cross-examination, Attorney John Schoenhorn asked about those gaps of time and if someone could intentionally shut off the infotainment system. Newth testified that he's not aware of any models that would have that option, but he's also never looked into it. So, Kevin, these are pretty large chunks of the day that Gumiany testified. He drove home from New Canaan in the Raptor and then had it until they all did that vehicle shuffling at 80 Mountain Spring Road. We know that technology, while can be amazing, has its limitations. It makes you wonder if the jury will see that technology as a helpful tool to help create a timeline or not.
Absolutely. Similar to the cell phone, all that data is incredibly useful. It's incredibly important inside the courtroom here. But when you're lacking some of those key points in time, of course, there are some frustrations from the jury. So ultimately, it'll be up to the jury to sort of connect some of those dots on their own using other testimony or other evidence that's already been entered in.
All right, Kevin Geist live for us once again outside Stamford Superior Court. We'll let you head into court for the day. Coming up next inside the trial, Michelle Troconis, we will revisit Pavel Gumiany's testimony and Attorney John Schoenhorn's cross-examination with our legal analyst, Jim Bergen. Stay with us. And welcome back to Inside the Trial of Michelle Troconis. We are joined once again by Attorney Jim Bergen, one of our legal analysts throughout the trial. Jim, great to see you once again. I want to start off with the big moment that Pavel Gumiany, when he took the stand. We caught up with Attorney John Schoenhorn on Thursday, and here's what he had to say about the key witness for the prosecution.
Now, I'm not going to comment on Mr. Gumiany's credibility. That's something for the jury and for all of you to decide. But I think what came out loud and clear is several days after the disappearance of Jennifer Dulos, both my client and Mr. Gumiany assumed she was still alive. And as far as I'm concerned, that is certainly the dispositive factor when it comes to the charge of conspiracy to commit murder.
And that was a big part of the testimony from Gumiany. He testified about a profanity-laced statement he says Michelle Troconis made about Jennifer after she disappeared. But according to him, she said that she was going to do something when Jennifer turns up. So exactly what do those statements that she made about Jennifer mean for both the prosecution and the defense?
Well, I think Mr. Schoenhorn is making a very valuable point for his client because, in fact, if someone's imagining what they would do or what should happen when she turns up and she's not yet known to be dead, how can she possibly be knowingly and intentionally getting rid of evidence of a killing? So it's a sound point. I thought, for me, it was the most powerful scare of evidence, this phrase of, oh, she ought to be buried with the dog. It's like, whoa. Well, that's because that's how the news will cover it. And if all you do is see that, it looks like, oh my goodness, she's got real animosity towards Jennifer. In fact, it's the opposite. She's not angry at Jennifer. She's really mad that Jennifer, in one particular incident, was very unkind to the kids. The dog was dying, and she wanted the kids to be able to say goodbye to the dog, and she wouldn't let them. And so this response was a reaction to that unkindness. And that seems very obvious, but you got to look at the context. And many of us say things that if you take it out of context, we look evil. But if you actually look at the context, it completely changes it. So I think Schoenhorn's done a good job on that.
And Pavel Gumini, even that testimony, had said, yeah, it was kind of a joke. She was trying to make Fotis feel better in the moment when he was, you know, knowing that his dog was going to be passing along, that the kids wouldn't be able to say goodbye. John Schoenhorn's cross-examination of Gumieni was high stakes. It lasted for hours, the majority of that happening on Wednesday. You're a defense attorney. Any takeaways about his strategy and how he delivered on this cross-examination?
Well, John Schoenhorn is a very smart and very experienced lawyer, and he has brought out these points that you've already brought out, which are kind of important. Because I've been teaching this so long, the only areas of tweaking, a little bit of improvement, I would suggest, is to be more relaxed about this and let the cops get their credit. You know, the cops really did a very, very good job, other than the fact that they have this belief that's incorrect, because even Colangelo said she doesn't know anything. So for me, I would be much more gentle on the cops and let the jury, let us all love the cops. They did really good work. So, but what he did score was very important stuff. He stayed on theme. When you get distracted and talk about things that aren't on your theme, you know, whatever little shiny object comes along and you want to cross on it, that doesn't actually help. It's a temptation, but it's hard to resist.
A big part of this, the credibility of Gumieni, really important for the state. Attorney John Schoenhorn tried to raise questions about his recollection of events, statements that he made. Do you think Gumieni's fuzzy memory hurts the state, or is it something that the jury can relate to?
Well, I think it's very neutral. The rest of us, all of us, have fuzzy memories about things that are not that critical to us, especially. And so I don't think it really hurt the state that he didn't have a good memory, but I do think it helps the defense because she was on, I was going to say on the stand, but she's really being interviewed. So she was in front of the jury at these interviews for a really long time. And so they're making this big deal about, oh, but she didn't remember this. And then she said this. Okay. And now we see that that's true for everybody. That's not a big deal.
One thing Judge Randolph had asked Attorney John Schoenhorn, because he kept grilling Gumieni on his whereabouts the day that Jennifer Dulos went missing. He was working at that New Canaan home. What did he do between that time frame that he is later seen back in Farmington? The judge at one point said, you know, this is ground that's already been plowed. But I mean, to his credit, Attorney John Schoenhorn is really trying to figure out if Gumieni, it's a memory issue or if he's avoiding answering some of those questions.
Right. Now, if that's thematic for his idea of his final argument, then he has to stay on it. The judge is doing the judge's job to do the best he can to move things along, and Schoenhorn's doing his job, which is, I gotta stay on my theme.
All right, much more analysis coming up from attorney Jim Bergen on Inside the Trial of Michelle Troconis. We will dig into the immunity deal Gumieni has and what attorney John Schoenhorn has to say about that. All right, we are back now with attorney Jim Bergen, one of our legal analysts throughout the trial. I want to play now, Jim, another clip of attorney John Schoenhorn's interview with our Kevin Geis on Thursday. He was asked about that immunity deal that Pavel Gumieni got, and if Fotis Dulos was still alive, if Michelle would have gotten a similar deal. Take a listen.
Let's put it this way. The fact that Mr. Gumieni's lawyer was clever enough to reach an agreement with the state's attorney in exchange for cooperation is what I believe to be the difference between why Mr. Gumieni is not on trial and my client is.
You'll remember and recall that Michelle Troconis was then represented by attorney Andrew Bowman. That was her original attorney in this case. So what do you think about Schoenhorn's statement and, of course, that issue of immunity?
Well, he suggests that that was available, and my experience with Andy Bowman, which is well over 40 years, he's a very experienced person, I don't think he had the choice. I think the choice that he had was, do I allow her to be interviewed or not be interviewed? And now what we've seen, these jurors have actually seen her, all videotaped. They've seen her for hours. And if she's acquitted, I think that's going to be a very big thing. And now she doesn't even have to take the stand. They already see it. So if, and by the way, obviously her presence and what she said convinced Andy Bowman that she was innocent. And ironically, it convinced the prosecutor, Colangelo. She doesn't know anything. He actually said it. So if, in fact, it works, then Andy Bowman's a genius. If it didn't work, I'm not sure what else you're going to do. Just let nobody ever talk to her, and then it really looks suspicious.
It begs the question, too, after that interview that Andy Bowman said that, why more charges were filed against Michelle Troconis. And again, if he really thought that at the time, then why didn't it end right there? Jem, thank you as always. We always appreciate your insight. That wraps up our exclusive Inside the Trial of Michelle Troconis streaming special. We appreciate you watching.